Okay.
Okay.
We are in Daf Kuf Chaf Beis, Amid Beis, 122b, and we just began the conversation. The Gemara is teaching us about the laws of mukta. When an item is mukta, and we're going to see later today the institution of mukta from its inception until where it is at the Gemara. And it went through various reiterations. What we have over here is using a vessel, using an item that is essentially made for a non-permitted use, such as an axe, a pitchfork, etc. These are really work that's made in gathering grains or hay, in cutting wood, chopping wood, etc., which would not be work that's permissible on Shabbos, and you're using it for a permissible item, and that essentially is a muktzah, because at the onset of Shabbos, you had no intention of using it, because it's essentially its main use is isser, for something that's not permitted, and here, if you need it, you can use it. So the Mishnah said, "Notaladam kurnas." A person could take a hammer to crack nuts, etc. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, kurnas shel hagozin lefatzeh hagozin. This is actually a hammer for the nuts, and even though that you had prior to Shabbos sort of designated it that you're going to use it for nuts, nevertheless, you cannot use it for other things unless you need the nuts itself. It still retains its muksa. That's the way Tues explains it, that even though that you had already before Shabbos designated it and with the intent of using it for the nuts, nevertheless, you can only use it for the nuts because that's a permissible use, but it still retains its muktzah status.
What do you mean only? You couldn't use it for like a paperweight, or? I mean, if you set it aside for nuts, you're saying it has to be used for nuts, or you could use it for another permissible use too?
Well, that's going to be a question. What Rabbi Yehuda would have thought: could you use it for another tzarach gufa? My point is that you couldn't just move it for no reason. You couldn't just move it for no reason. It still retains its muktzah, but more importantly, you can only use it on account of that you designated it before Shabbos to use for the nuts. Haval shel nafachin, but if you're using a smith, if the hammer is essentially what you use as a smith, and you didn't intend before Shabbos to use it for food or for a permissible usage, and now on Shabbos you say, "Oh, we got a coconut, let's break it. We got some walnuts and they're not opening. Let's bring a hammer." You're not allowed to do that, because because he follows the opinion that says that even though you need to use this for a permissible use, you want to use it for something that is is allowed on Shabbos, since the primary main use of this item is a melachta le'isser. Its work is a prohibited work on Shabbos, such as a hammer that is primarily used for construction, which is prohibited on Shabbos, or if it's a type of hammer that's for deconstruction. Either way, it's a melachta le'isser. Its work is primarily prohibited on Shabbos, and so the vessel may not be used even if you're using it for a permissible use. Amalei Rabba. So Rabba said, "El miyata." If that's the case, say for the ktani sarechas v'samalges, somebody's using a peel or a pitchfork to bring food to a child. Lasel of lekata. If you're saying that our Mishnah is talking about that it was designated for its permissible use. We can understand that more in a hammer that generally is used for construction, and you've dedicated it before Shabbos. You've designated it for your walnut, or etc. But is it really going to be prior to Shabbos a designation of a peel or a pitchfork to give food to a child? These are not. This is not a common thing, so it's not likely the meaning of the Mishnah. Rather, our Mishnah is talking about that you did not designate it, because if you designated it, it's no longer a klisha malachta lis. It's not a vessel that is of a prohibited work, but rather, if you've designated it, now it's permissible work, or at least both. And the Mishabura brings this halacha that if it's a vessel that is both has two primary usages, both a permissible one and a prohibited one, so that you would be able to move this. And so over here, if you had designated it, of course it would be permissible. And what our case is talking about in our Mishnah, where you did not designate it for a prohibited use, you did not designate it for the permissible use. It's primarily for a prohibited use, and nevertheless, you're allowed to use it on Shabbos. Because Kasavar, now we go to Kuf Chav Gimel Amid Aleph, you go to 123a, because he holds even if the vessel is made for prohibited for prohibited work, nevertheless you're allowed to benefit from it and use it on Shabbos if you're using it for a permissible work, meaning you're using the primary, you're using it in a primary way. You're using it for itself. You don't need its place. You need it. You need the hammer in order to open the coconut. So that you're allowed to do. So Abaye asked Rabbi, Meducha, a mortar and pestle that you use to crush some spices. So actually, it seems in the Gemara that there are two sizes of meduchas, of these mortar and pestles. There are small ones that are made for spices, and there are larger ones that are made for garlic and onion and some other larger things. And those could be used as well, which obviously the grinding on Shabbos would be prohibited. But there's another use for it as well, which is that some people would then turn it upside down and use it as a stool. So if it has crushed garlic in there, so then it's permissible to be used. If not, you're not allowed to use it. You're not allowed to move it. And Rashi says the reason you're allowed to move it is because since you're allowed to move the garlic, you can move this along with it. And this is a great discussion as what is the basis for moving this. Is it that it is nullified to the garlic, even though that I'm not trying to get the garlic, I'm actually trying to turn it over and sit on it, or is it because since there's garlic in there at the onset of Shabbos, I hadn't set it aside, so even if now the garlic's not in there, I would be allowed to move it. But in any case, I can move it if there's garlic in there. But if there is not, I'm not allowed to move it, even though I intend to use the item itself for a permissible use. He says, no, that statement, that halacha, is not according to the Chachamim. That's according to the opinion of Rabbi Nechemiah. As we'll see later, Rabbi Nechemiah is of the opinion that everything is muktzah on Shabbos if you're not using it for its primary use. In other words, as we were talking about, the basis for muktzah is that at the onset of Shabbos, certain items that you cannot use on Shabbos because their primary use is prohibited on Shabbos, essentially maktzeh medaito. You set it aside in your mind as I'm not going to use it and since at the onset of Shabbos it was set aside, excluded from your intent, it remains muktzah for the rest of Shabbos. Now, how far to take that or how narrow that is going to be a great discussion that we'll see later in the Gemara. But Rabbi Nechemiah is of the opinion that every item you only even though you intend to use it, but its only intent is for the primary use that you intend that it's used for, and therefore using anything for in a way that it's not meant to be used primarily is going to be prohibited on Shabbos. So even though you have this maducha, which could be used as a stool, nevertheless you cannot use this mortar and pestle and turn it upside down and sit on it, because that's not its primary use. And so at the onset of Shabbos, that was not the intent. That's the opinion of Rabbi Nechemiah. You can only take a vessel for its primary use. So we ask a question. There's a vessel called the ali. I don't know what it would be in English, but it's a larger wood vessel. It seems like it's like a flat piece of wood, like a plank that would be used to crush larger things, and is sometimes would be used as a cutting board. So on Yantiv, where you cut meat on it, the Brisa says both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who discuss whether or not you're allowed to originally take it in order to use it as a cutting board for meat, they both agree that if you already did, that once you're done cutting the meat, you can't move it anymore, because because at this point you're not taking it for a use. So the Gemara wanted to say, Sabai wanted to say, you know what, that too is Rabbi Nechemiah. Sabar l'shenuya like Rabbi Nechemiah want to say that too is according to the opinion of Rabbi Nechemiah that anything not for its primary use is going to be prohibited. And so over here, you're going to move it for a non-primary use. Even the Rav, but when he heard from the teaching of Rabbi China in the name of Rav, that in regards to the vessels called Sichi Zairi Mazuri, what exactly these vessels are, Rashi brings various opinions of whether they're painters' vessels or weavers' vessels, but either way, they're part of a particular craft and are only used within that craft, and the craftsmen set it aside and don't use it for anything else, either because of their weight or because of how particular they are. Either way, miyachid lehu makom. It has a designated place, and that's where it's meant to remain. You don't just leave it around, and you don't take it from there unless you're using it for its primary use. And therefore, it's going to be muksa. So since we know that that's true in regards to Sichi Zair Missouri, that miyachid lemakam, you designate a place for it. So essentially, it's not just that you, at the onset of Shabbos, didn't intend to use it, but rather, as Rashi says, you specifically by act put it aside before Shabbos as non-usable. You maksale biyadayim, not only in your mind do not think of using it, or in your mind did you set it aside, but you put it into a place with the intent of not using it, essentially setting it aside, putting it away for Shabbos. That is a maksale biyadayim. By hand you set it aside. By hand you put it away as a non-usable thing. And if that's true for Sichis Zair Missouri, so too for this Ali, for this crushing tool as well, even though that you could use it for a cutting board, but you don't intend for that, and therefore it's going to remain muksa, and you couldn't just move it.
I'm remembering something that I saw, and I don't know if it's in the Gemara or it's in the Farshim, but that really there was a tzad to say that on Shabbos you shouldn't be able to move, like everything should be muksa. You shouldn't move.
We'll see that soon in the Gemara. We'll see that. So what we have over here is, even according to the opinion that says that you may use a prohibited item, an item that's primarily used for prohibited act, with the intent of using it for a permissible thing. So take a hammer, you can use it to crack your coconut, or take a hammer to crush a walnut. We saw other things in the Gemara in the Mishnah, a saw to cut some cheese, etc. Even though that those are permissible, those are going to be items that, even though that their primary use is malachta le'isser, its primary use is a prohibited work. Nevertheless, it's something that you may use for other things as well, and as such, they're within one's mind for Shabbos. But specific items that have a designated place, and you only use it for that item, you put it aside, and you don't intend to use it in any other way, and therefore you makza lebiyadayim, you by hand, with not only by intent but by hand, set it aside and pushed it out of Shabbos use, set it aside for non-Shabbos use, and therefore you cannot move it for even for its own use on Shabbos. A goldsmith's hammer, shaninu. That's what we're talking about, that you're allowed to use. And the reason is that even though that they're pretty particular about it, because they don't want it to get any they need the hammer to be very smooth in order to make the gold, the gold jewelry and the gold items that the smith is making with a hammer that's smooth. Nevertheless, even if it'll get slightly nicked from banging on walnuts, he can fix it. He can fix the hammer by knocking it on the cornice on the table on which he works. The smith works, and therefore he may use it on Shabbos. Now we're talking about a spice hammer, and there it needs to be they're even more particular because it's for food. They wouldn't use it for other things other than for food, and therefore mandama the besamim, the one that says that we're talking about that you're allowed to use a spice hammer. Kalshkein zahavim, for sure you can use a goldsmith's hammer. Mandama shel zahavim, but the one that says you're allowed to use a goldsmith's hammer, aval the besamim kapidalai, but perhaps he would hold that you're not allowed to use a spice maker's hammer, because since that's food, he's very particular with it remaining clean and would not want it used for other items. The Mishnah continued, you're going to use essentially as a toothpick or something that will, or as a something that you can stick into a vegetable to lift it, like a skewer. You're going to use a karkar. So let's define it according to one opinion, which is that they would have this a knob-shaped handle that would end in a arched pick, and that would be used to separate threads that had become intertwined in the weaving and to make them neat and in a straight line. So that pick, which is essentially a device that is used for weaving, and weaving is prohibited on Shabbos, so therefore it would be muksa, because at the onset of Shabbos, again, in your mind, you have no intent to use this. But since it's a permissible use to pick up a vegetable, that would be permissible. Now, the way they would store vegetables, we've seen this before. So root vegetables, in order to keep them fresh, they would be put underground. They would make a little hole in the ground and put it in and partially cover it in order to keep it fresh. They didn't have refrigerators, and then they would lift it up and pull it out when they wanted the vegetable. And as we saw earlier in the Masechta, multiple times, that you're allowed to do this even because it doesn't count as if it's replanted, because it's only there to keep it fresh, and the intent is to take it out. And it also is not a muktzah item, because your intent is to take it out. And the dirt over it is not going to be muktzah either, as we're going to see soon, because when you take it, it falls off on its own. That's not your action, at least if you have some of the vegetables still sticking out. Another way that it would be used is that they would unripened fruit would sometimes be put in some hay, and that would help it ripen. And again, you would use this karkar as a skewer to stick into the vegetable or the fruit and pull it out. So Tanarmanan, Hagesh Shatamana B'Tevin. you stuck a unripened fig into hay, and even though the hay is prohibited because it was essentially going to be used as a non-permissible use in a non-Shabbos permissible use in being put into cement, or charara, which is something that is being roasted on coal. So imegula miktsasef, part of it is uncovered. So anyhow, you can grab onto that and pull it up. Mutalataltala, you can take it, and because the dirt that's going to fall off of it is not your action at all. It doesn't even count as you indirectly making it fall. You're just picking up the vegetable and the dirt's falling in. The dirt or the hay is falling in. However, vimlav, if it's not uncovered, and the only way for you to get to the vegetable is by pushing aside some dirt or some hay or some coals, then it's prohibited. You can use this weaving tool and stick it into the vegetable using the point to stick it into the vegetable, and this way you'll be able to remove it without you removing the hay, moving the hay aside. You just lift the vegetable, and the hay that moves is happening indirectly, not your action itself. And it falls off on its own. Ram Nachman says that's indeed the halacha, that even though that is the vegetable is fully covered, the fig is fully covered with hay, nevertheless you could take your skewer, your pick, and stick it into the vegetable and pull it out. And the fact that the muktzah item, the hay, the non-Shabbos usable item, is going to fall off of it, that's a tiltul min atzad, a indirect movement of it, or essentially movement from its side. You're using it like the back of your hand is moving it, and therefore it's permissible. It's tiltul min atzad. The Memra, so that tells us the Savaram Nachman tiltul min atzad lishmei tiltul, that you're allowed to, even in a muktzah item, it doesn't count as moving it when you move it in an indirect way. Move it from the side, from your body, and not with your hand. In an indirect way is going to be permissible. Well, what about the vegetable, the root vegetable? So let's say a turnip. So these vegetables have a flat top and come to a point in the bottom part of the root. So if you put it in that way, in the root way, so say like a carrot or a beet or a turnip, so all these come to a point in the lower part and they're wider at the top part. So if you remove it in that way, that's permissible. But if it's upside down, so then when you even if the point is sticking out and you pull it, what's going to happen is you're essentially moving all of the dirt that's on the vegetable, and that's called a tiltul min atzad. That's an indirect movement, and yet he says it's prohibited. Hadar Rav Nachman Mahis. The Gemara says, yes, it's true. That is a statement Rav Nachman said, and at first he thought that would be prohibited on the basis of it being tiltul min atzad, indirect movement of the muktzah items such as the dirt, which is muktzah, or the straw, which is muktzah. And he retracted and follows and went with Rabbi Tzvi Fischer's opinion that no, that these do not count as tiltul min atzad, these do not count as tiltul as movement because they're tiltul min atzad, because it is an indirect movement and it is permissible on Shabbos. Machat shel yad litel boy esakot. Another prohibited item that's allowed to be used for a permissible use, our Mishnah says, is a needle to remove a splinter, and the permissible use there is removing a splinter. So shalach le Rava bereider Rabbi Rav Yosef Yamdeinu Rabbeinu machat shenitul charoroi uktzam ma'u. What about a needle that is lost a part of its vessel do we say, in other words, it either lost the eye of the needle, so you can no longer put thread through it in order to use it as a needle, or it lost its point, so you no longer can use it really to sew. Are you allowed to move this on Shabbos, or do you say it's not a non-vessel, it is useless, and therefore it's muksa on account of that it's useless? So he said, even though that it's useless in the sense of its primary original use, which is sewing, but you can still use it to remove a splinter, and therefore it is not muksa. Because what difference does it make to the splinter if the eye of the needle, where you usually put the thread in, is still there or not? So we ask a question. In regards to Tuma, we know that a vessel that broke and no longer a usable vessel loses its Tuma status. So I have a vessel that became Tame, and then it broke to the degree that it's no longer usable. And that vessel is going to lose its Tuma status, and it becomes Tahor again. So a needle that lost either the eye of the needle or the point of the needle is no longer Tame. It's now Tahor. It loses its Tuma status. Shabbos Karama. So you comparing Shabbos to Tuma? Tuma, Kli Ma'aseh B'inon. For Tuma, you need it to be a vessel that has its primary work. In other words, it has to be the vessel that became Tame. Here it lost that. If we could use the word vesselhood, it lost its status as a kli because its primary function, its functionality is lost, and therefore it's not a vessel. In regards to Shabbos, I just need usability. I don't need the status of a vessel. I don't need it to be a kli masa, a functional item. A functional vessel. I need it to just have some sort of use, and therefore it's not a makta medaite. Therefore, I could say that in my mind this is usable on Shabbos, so I didn't set it aside for Shabbos. So if I can use it for a splinter, then it retains its use for Shabbos. But for Tuma, it's still not a sewing needle anymore, and so it loses its status. Because for Shabbos it's usable to remove a splinter. Rava says, no, the question is a very good question. The comparison to Shabbos and Tuma, between Shabbos and Tuma, is good. Because just as for Shabbos, and just as for Tuma, it's not a vessel anymore and loses its Tuma status. It's now Tahor. So too, in regards to Shabbos, it lost its status as a vessel, and therefore is a non-vessel, and cannot be moved on because it's non-usable. So we ask a question: well, we have a needle. It says that a needle, regardless of whether it has an eye of a needle or not, whether it has the hole to put the thread through, regardless, it's permissible to be used on Shabbos. If you have a use for it, such as to remove a splinter, you're allowed to move it. So we see that this item, even though that it is essentially a prohibited item, you're allowed to use it on Shabbos if you have a use for it, such as taking a splinter out. And this is an item that's not yet going to be tamei because it's not it doesn't have the eye of the needle. It's not a complete needle. And the fact that it needs the hole in order for the thread to go through to count as a usable a threading needle, that's only in regards to Tumah. So that's a contradiction to Rava's halacha. Abaye, who disagreed with Rava, nevertheless said, no, I can answer this for Rava, for the other opinion. Begulmi askin, and that's talking about that it was still in the process of being created. It was still a piece of metal that had not been completed as a vessel. Therefore, in regards to Shabbos, it already has the point, so it's usable for the splinter, and you can remove it. So that's great. In regards to Tuma, it's not yet a completed vessel, and therefore it's going to retain its non-vessel status and not be susceptible to Tuma. The previous case was a vessel that was already a vessel and lost its eye of the needle by breaking it off. There, it's a broken vessel and loses its status both for Shabbos and for Tum. Because in the process of creating a vessel without that doesn't have the eye of the needle, he may still turn it into another type of needle by making it a point. By making it a pin. And so as long as it has a point already, it can have functionality, and so it's still in the process of being made. It can be made in other ways, and so it counts as a good vessel regards to Shabbos. But if it broke, the eye of the needle broke off, or the point broke off, therefore a person will throw it away, put it back into scrap metal to turn it into something else, and it's not a vessel, not for Shabbos and not for Tum. Asuva Yenuke. What about smoothing out a baby after birth? There was some massaging that was done to help its limbs be smooth. Rutessa says it's a sort of swaddle, whatever the case is. There was a part of after the baby was born that would do some sort of massaging to the baby. So Rav Nachman said this prohibited because you're completing the person, as it were. So you're completing a vessel, a human. And we saw before that there is a concept of tikkun mana, tikkun gavra, just as like this completing a vessel, making it complete. So too for a human, there is a concept of making complete the Rabbanan prohibition of completing a human, making complete, such as going to the mikveh, etc. So Rav Nachman prohibited. However, Rav Sheshes said, no, you're allowed to do whatever this massaging to the baby is. Rav Nachman says, how do I know that it's prohibited? The Tanan, as we learned, and here we're going to turn to Kuf Chav Gimel Amid Beis, Ein Osin Apiktois, and you're not allowed to make some potion that caused people, it was basically a laxative or induced vomiting. You're not allowed to do this on Shabbos. So you see that even though that is not medicinal in and of itself, it helps out, that's going to be prohibited on Shabbos. So too over here, you're not allowed to do this to the baby. Rav Sheshes, he says, no, there, because it's an abnormal thing to do. It's only done on rare occasions. This, however, is a normal thing. It's like feeding the baby. You're massaging the baby in this way to make it comfortable or put its limbs into place. Rav Sheshes says, how do I know that that's the halacha? You're allowed to take a splinter out with from our Mishnah. It says you can use a needle to remove a splinter. Now, removing a splinter also is making the person whole again, and nevertheless, it's permissible. He says no. Pocket the splinter is separate to the body. It just happens to be stuck into the body. So you're removing something that's separate. Here, by the baby, you're actually fixing the internals of the human. You're making the person whole in that way, and that's going to be prohibited. Even though it's rabbinic, of course, because you're not really doing anything you're not completing the vessel. The baby is complete. Nevertheless, it's prohibited according to Nachman. The halacha is obviously, like we said, like Rav Sheshes, that this is not a prohibited act for the baby. I don't know anything like that today that we do, but I don't know a lot of things. Kana shel zeisim. So the process of making olive oil or really olives are very hard fruit and when they come off the tree and not really usable, and they are put into a vessel to store, and they ooze their juices, which sort of softens them in a natural brine, and that's the way the olives turn. And so they'd have a like a bamboo shoot tool to test it, to see what's going on at the bottom of the barrel, which had all the juices. And they would stick this down to the bottom and bring it up and see how deep the juices are in the bottom of the olive barrel, and whether it's acidic enough and how it's turning. So this reed that's in the olive barrel is going to be a vessel in regards to the juices that it contains, if it has a knot. So basically these reeds would have, like if you may be familiar from bamboo, that it has every so often it has a knot, and that seals off the inside of the reed and it's no longer hollow. So if you stick it into the barrel to the bottom and pick it up and turn it, some of the juices will be in there in a receptacle and you can see it. So that's going to be a receptacle and make it tameh. However, if it's just a flat piece of reed, then it's going to not be susceptible to tumah on account of that it is pshutei klieh. It's a flat piece of wood and not a receptacle and not susceptible to tumah. So kana shel zaysim, this reed of olives, for the olive making, if it has this knot in it, so therefore it is not completely hollow, and so it's susceptible to tumah on account of that the juices can be contained in there, and you can test or analyze the olives. If not, it's not susceptible to tumah. However, regardless of whether it has the knot or not, whether it's a vessel in regards to tumah or not, either way, it's allowed to be moved on Shabbos as for whatever need you have. So the Gemara asks, so what's it's a flat piece of wood. It's not made into anything. So a plain piece of wood, not made into any vessel. Why is it susceptible to tumah? My time, dumi the sack, be'inon. So it's not susceptible to tumah because it needs to be like a sackcloth. It has to be something that is a vessel. Because when he turns the olives, he turns this reed upside down as well to analyze the juices that are contained in the area that is closed off. The Mishnah said up until now that there are certain vessels permitted on Shabbos, certain prohibited on Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi is going to tell us the most lenient opinion that no, only particular items, that you're very particular not to use it in any other way, and you set it aside before Shabbos only for its particular use, that is prohibited on Shabbos. But anything else, any other vessels are permissible. Rabbi Yossi, you can use any vessel. If it's a vessel, you can move it on Shabbos. Chutz min ha-meser agadol. Besides for the great saw, which is a large saw, and usually you're particular about it because you want it to maintain its sharp, its teeth, and therefore you wouldn't use it for anything else. And usually it's used for cutting beams, and you want it to be straight so that it cuts neatly. And the plow, the peg of the plow that goes into the ground, you don't want that to be to be off kilter. You also need that to be straight down so that it moves easily, and therefore that too you would not use for any other item. This is a copper mesh. Either it's used in the cleaning process of garments, whether it is put on top to keep it neat, or it's used to let it dry over smoke to give it a scent or to kill the bugs. Either way, it's a copper mesh that's only used in the cleaning process of garments, and it's never used for anything else. And the cleaners will put it aside and be very careful with it because it needs to be smooth and straight to do its job. and therefore it is like these other items that are not allowed to be used on Shabbos because people, the people are particular about it, not to ruin it. These tools as well. It's a leather maker's knife where he cuts the leather particularly straight in order to make straps and belts, etc. And a cleaver, a butcher's cleaver, and this other item, I'm not sure what it is, a wood a carving item, are prohibited to be used on Shabbos as well, because these also, the smith is very particular not to use it for anything else. He'd never cut a vegetable with it. They'd never just leave it around, and therefore it's muktzah, because prior to Shabbos, you put it aside with the intent of not using it on Shabbos because you wouldn't use it for anything other than its original and main use. Tana Rabbana. So here the Mishnah is going to tell us a brisa of the evolution of muktzah. At first, it was said that 3 vessels may be used on Shabbos, and that's it. And they are vessels that are the main vessels used in a house. Back when they didn't have forks and knife for every person, and maybe not even a bowl for every person, all the food went into the center of the table. So you had 3 vessels, miktsah shel devela, something to cut the figs with, mazuama, sitra shel kedera, and a spoon that basically would take all the froth off of a pot of a soup, misakin katana shel gabe shulchan, and a small knife on the table that was used to cut bread and food, whatever was on the table. So those are the 3 items that we used. They were primary uses in the house. They were intended to be used. So as opposed to up until now, when we're saying muktzah was anything you don't intend to use is muktzah. At that point, they said everything is muktzah unless you specifically and it's widely accepted that there is an intent to use this on Shabbos. Hitiru, v'chazar v'tiru. And then they were more lenient, and then they were more lenient, and then they were again more lenient. Until we got to the point where we said any vessel is permissible on Shabbos, besides for the vessels we just talked about, the great saw and the plowing peg, and we added in the Gemara a few others like it. Well, people are very particular and would only use it for its original intent for the because they don't want it to get damaged or bent or ruined, and therefore that specifically is intended not to be used on Shabbos. So Gemara now is going to give a couple opinions as to what were the stages of prohibition and permissible. So my hitiru v'chazar v'tiru. So what were the stages of this making it more permissible? Amar Abaye, hitiru davar shemalachta leheter. So the Gemara is going to tell us that essentially what happened was in the days of Rabbi Nehemiah ben Chakilai, Nehemiah from the book of Nehemiah, he came and he saw that Jews were plowing on Shabbos and everything was permissible to them on Shabbos. They didn't know the boundaries. And in order to get people to understand prohibitions of Shabbos and to stop certain malacha and to focus Shabbos not on work but on Shabbos, he said, you can't use any vessels. The only thing you can use is what's usable for food. And that separated people. When people started getting used to that, so then they permitted more, and they permitted more, and they permitted more. So what were the things that became permitted? So Abaye says, first, other things that its main use is permissible on Shabbos. They permitted it first l'tzarech gufa, for its own use. So something that's permissible on Shabbos, such as a fork, you're allowed to use it to feed yourself with. But you couldn't use it for other things. And then you can even use a fork if it's on the table and you want to read a book and put it on the table. So you want to move the fork not to use, but rather to use its space. Then they said, okay, even something that's prohibited, like a hammer, which you wouldn't use on Shabbos, nevertheless you can use it to crack a nut. But you could, if it was on the table and you wanted to read and you wanted to move it, l'tzarech makoma, for its place, l'tzarech makoma, but not for its place. And still, it would only be permissible if it's something you can do with one hand, but not something that would require two hands. Amru, until they said, no, all vessels are allowed to be used on Shabbos, still only for a permissible use, not for its place, not because you need it away from where it is, but rather because you need it itself, but still, even with two hands, even a larger vessel. Rava tomorrow, we'll see. Rava says, no, the stages of permissibility were different because using it for itself and using it and moving it for its place are going to be equivalent, and therefore the stages were different. But this was Abai's interpretation of what were the stages of permissibility, that they were more lenient successively until it came to this point that a vessel that the primary use is prohibited on Shabbos, nevertheless may be used if you're using it itself, but not to move it for its place. And tomorrow we'll continue with this.